What does a man do when he has it all? A beautiful, loving wife, a self-made million-dollar company, a life of luxury. For Rowan Fairborn, the answer was simple. He threw it all away. He divorced his pregnant wife, Celia, for his ambitious mistress, believing he was upgrading to a bigger, better life. He thought he was a shark in a world of minnows. But he forgot one crucial detail. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds all the power. And he was about to find out. His wife wasn't a minnow. She was the Leviathan. The lie, like their life, was beautiful. It was curated, built from salvaged driftwood and sun-bleached linen, smelling of old books and expensive coffee. Rowan Fairborn, a man sculpted from raw ambition and granite-hewn good looks, loved the life he'd built with Celia. He was new money, a tech millionaire who had clawed his way out of a joyless, rusted-out childhood in the shadow of a steel mill. His company, Ethereal, a name he'd chosen for its airy, untouchable sound, was his everything. It was his proof, his validation. And Celia was his anchor. He'd met her at a chaotic farmer's market. He was barking into his phone, closing a Series B funding round, and he'd literally run into her. She'd been holding a crate of bruised, overripe tomatoes. The collision was cinematic. He was apologies and crisp $100 bill energy. She was laughter and tomato pulp, wiping a smear of red from his pristine white shirt with a calloused, gentle hand. She was, he'd decided, real. She ran a vintage shop called Second Story, a tiny, bell-chiming door tucked away on a cobblestone street. It was a place of soft-focus nostalgia, filled with things that had already lived one life and were waiting for another. It barely made any money, but it made her happy. She wore second-hand floral dresses and expensive, sturdy leather boots. She had no interest in his board meetings, his valuations, his stock options. She loved him. The man who, away from the glass and steel tower of Ethereal, would slow dance with her in their kitchen, a vinyl record hissing with static in the background. She was his escape from the crushing pressure to be Rowan Fairborn, CEO. With her, he was just Rowan. But Celia had a secret, a deep, foundational one. Her real name wasn't Celia Knight by chance. It was Knight, as in Alistair Knight, as in Knight Capital, the global behemoth that bought and sold entire countries before breakfast. She was the sole heir to an empire so vast that Rowan's million-dollar company was, by comparison, a child's lemonade stand. This was her perfect lie. She hadn't lied about her name, but she'd lied by omission. She had fled that world of suffocating, transactional love years ago, desperate to be loved for herself, not for her stock portfolio. She wanted a man who could build something of his own, not one who just wanted to attach himself to her inheritance. And she'd found him. Rowan was everything her father's world was not. Self-made, passionate, authentic. She loved his grit, his calluses, the way he'd fought for every single thing he had. She loved him so much, in fact, that she was now terrified to tell him the truth. She'd waited too long. How do you tell the most ambitious man you've ever met that his entire struggle has been for a level of wealth you could eclipse with a single phone call? That his definition of making it was her family's pocket change? So she stayed quiet. She was just Celia, the artist, the shop owner, the anchor. The lie began to crack on a rainy Tuesday. For weeks, Celia had been feeling off. A metallic taste in her mouth, a bone-deep weariness that the afternoon lattes couldn't touch. She'd bought the test from a 24-hour pharmacy at 3 a.m., hiding it in the box of a cheap bottle of wine. Now, she stood in their palatial, marble-tiled bathroom, the one Rowan had been so proud of. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the Chicago skyline into a blurry neon watercolor. In her left hand, the pregnancy test. 2 pink lines, stark and undeniable. A tiny, fluttering life. A new, fierce, primal wave of love washed over her, so potent it made her dizzy. In her right hand, the letter she'd found on Rowan's desk, which he'd forgotten in his haste that morning. It wasn't a love letter. It was from his lawyers. Ethereal was in trouble. Deep trouble. A rival company, Apex, was staging a hostile takeover. They'd been buying up stock discreetly for months. Rowan, in his aggressive expansion, had over-leveraged. He was exposed. He was on the verge of losing everything. Celia sank onto the cold marble floor, the test in one hand, the letter in the other. She was pregnant, and her husband was about to be ruined. She felt a strange, cold calm settle over her. The fear of telling him her secret evaporated, replaced by a sudden, clear resolve. She could fix this. She could pick up the phone, call her father's fixer, Marcus, and this entire Apex problem would disappear by morning. Alistair Knight could crush Apex with a single keystroke. She would save him. She would save his company. And then, with this gift, this proof of her love, she would tell him everything. About the baby, about her family, about her. It would be the end of the lie. It would be the beginning of their real life. She smiled, a hand going to her still flat stomach, the first genuine, uncomplicated smile in years. She didn't know it yet, but she was smiling at the precise, agonizing moment that her life, the one she loved, was already over. Rowan Fairborn was drowning, and the water was made of glass and steel. His office, which normally felt like a conqueror's perch, now felt like a cage. 30 floors above the city, he watched the same rain that Celia saw. But to him, it wasn't romantic. It was a dirge. The letter Celia was holding was just the summary. The reality was 100 times worse. The hostile takeover wasn't just a business move. It was a betrayal. The orchestrator was a woman named Serafina Darcy, a VP at Apex, whom Rowan had known for years. She was his opposite in every way. Where he was raw, self-taught energy, she was old money polish, with a voice like silk sliding over a razor. She'd been educated at the right schools, knew the right people, and had always looked at Rowan with a mixture of amusement and, he thought, hunger. For the past month, as Ethereal's stock began to wobble, Serafina had been present. She'd appeared at the same charity galas, the same investor meetings. She'd run into him at the high-end sushi bar he frequented. "Rowan, darling," she'd purred just last week, adjusting the lapel of his suit. "You've built a lovely little engine, but you're trying to fly it to the moon, and you've forgotten to build wings." He'd bristled, but he was also intrigued. She didn't coddle him like Celia. She didn't make him feel grounded. She made him feel like he could fly higher. "Your new money, Rowan," she'd said, her dark eyes pinning him. "You have the ambition, but you don't have the map. You're fighting a war with a stick, and the other side has armies. You need an ally who speaks the language." Now he understood. She wasn't offering an alliance. She was offering a surrender. Apex wanted his technology, his platform, but not him. The terms of the takeover were brutal. They would absorb Ethereal, and he would be ousted, left with a respectable but insulting severance package. He wouldn't be a CEO. He'd just be a rich guy. The thought was nauseating. His entire identity was his company. His trauma from childhood, the feeling of being powerless, of being the poor kid in dirty shoes, was the engine that drove him. Being just a rich guy was a kind of death. He was pacing, jacket off, tie loosened, when his phone buzzed. It was Serafina. "I see the lawyers finally sent the hello note." Her voice was smooth. No trace of triumph. Just business. "It's a generous offer, Rowan. Take it. You'll be free. We could build something else. Together." "I'm not selling," he growled. "You don't have a choice," she said softly. "You're leveraged to the hilt. The board is spooked. I have the votes. This is a courtesy call. I'm giving you 48 hours to accept, or we go public with your debt-to-asset ratio. Your stock will tank before the opening bell. This is a rescue, Rowan, not an attack." The line clicked dead. He swept his arm across his desk. The minimalist lamp, the framed photo of him and Celia on their wedding day, the stupid, expensive Newton's cradle, all of it crashed to the floor. The glass on the photo frame shattered. He stared at it. Celia smiling at him, her eyes so full of uncomplicated love. And for the first time in his life, that uncomplicated love felt simple, insufficient. She ran a shop of dead people's things. What could she possibly understand about this? About the blood and sacrifice it took to build something? He'd hidden the company's problems from her to protect her. Now he realized he'd hidden it because he was ashamed. And, on some level, he knew she wouldn't have the first clue how to help. He'd get a there, a back rub, and an offer to go for a walk. He needed a shark. He was becoming a man Celia wouldn't recognize, and the terrifying part was, he was starting to think that was a good thing. That night, he went home. The apartment was dark, save for the kitchen. Celia was there, a single candle lit. She had on one of his old, soft t-shirts, and she looked fragile, worried. "Rowan, you're home late." "It was a long day," he said, his voice flat. He walked past her to the bar, pouring a large scotch. "Rowan, we need to talk," she said, her voice small. I found the letter, from the lawyers, about Apex." He froze, his back to her. "You went through my desk." It was an accusation, cold and sharp. "No, it was out. Rowan, I'm so sorry, but I want to help. I can help." He laughed, a short, bitter bark. "Help? How? Are you going to sell some vintage teacups? Are you going to hold a bake sale, Celia?" The cruelty of it hung in the air, thick and toxic. He saw her flinch, as if he'd slapped her. She stammered. "I have resources. People I can call. People you don't know about." "People?" he sneered, turning to face her. The scotch was working fast, fueling the anger, the fear, the self-loathing. "What people? The Cobblestone Street Association? You don't get it, do you? This is the real world. This is a war, and I'm losing. And you're standing there talking about resources." He was desperate for her to be the person he needed right now. He was daring her to be more. I'm pregnant, Rowan." It came out as a whisper. The two words he was least equipped to hear. The silence that followed was absolute. He stared at her. Pregnant. A baby. A complication. A boat anchor on a drowning man. All he could see were sleepless nights, divided attention, expense. A baby was messy, domestic, small. "Rowan?" she whispered, her eyes wide with a dawning fear. This wasn't the reaction she'd dreamed of. "Rowan, I can help with the company, I promise. Just let me make one call." "Stop." He held up a hand. He couldn't process it. The baby. The company. Her help. It was all a suffocating, domestic trap. He felt the walls of the perfect life closing in. "Celia," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "A baby. Now. That is the worst possible timing." He didn't see the love. He didn't see the miracle. He saw another chain. "I have to go," he said, putting down his glass. I have a meeting to fix this." "A meeting? At 10 p.m.? Celia was crying now, silent, terrified tears. Rowan, please don't go. Let me help you. I have to tell you something. Something important. Not now, Celia. He grabbed his keys, his jacket. He didn't look back. I'm not going to lose my company. Not for you. Not for this. I have to fix this. He walked out of the apartment, out of their life, the sound of her small sob swallowed by the ding of the elevator. He got in his car. He didn't drive to his office. He drove to the glittering, cold apex tower. He drove straight to Serafina. She had been the shark. And he, the drowning man, was about to offer himself up, not as prey, but as a mate. Celia didn't sleep. She sat in the dark kitchen until the sun came up, the candle guttering and dying in its own wax. The ding of the elevator had been the sound of a door slamming shut on a part of her life. He didn't come home. Around 4 a.m., she'd tried to call him. The phone rang once, then went to voicemail. His phone was never off. He was a man who lived in terror of a missed call, a missed opportunity. He'd turned it off. Or someone had turned it off for him. The morning light, usually soft and hopeful in their apartment, felt harsh and accusatory. It illuminated the dust on the shelves, the smear of his fingerprint on the whiskey glass. She thought about his words. A bake sale. The worst possible timing. He had looked at her, at the news of their child, with a kind of disgust, as if she had done it to him. She clutched her stomach. It's okay, baby, she whispered to the empty room. He's just scared. He'll come back. But he didn't. He came back at noon, smelling of unfamiliar, expensive perfume. A sharp, musky scent. Nothing like Celia's soft, vanilla and old paper smell, and the stale tang of someone else's apartment. He walked in like a stranger. His suit was pristine, a different one from yesterday. His hair was wet from a recent shower. He was all sharp edges and cold resolve. Celia, he said. No, I'm sorry. No. Are you okay? Just her name, like a summons. Rowan, where were you? She asked, her voice hoarse from crying and lack of sleep. I was saving my company, he said. I was saving us. Us? By not coming home? By turning off your phone? I was in a meeting, a marathon session. He couldn't quite meet her eyes, and that, more than anything, confirmed it. Serafina Darcy, the woman from Apex. We found a solution. Serafina, Celia repeated the name. It felt sharp in her mouth. Yes, she's brilliant. She sees the long-term play. She's not going to take the company. We're going to merge, Ethereal and Apex. She and I will be co-CEOs. We're going to be bigger than ever. Celia's heart, which had been a cold stone of dread, suddenly flared with a hot, sickening jealousy. He was glowing. He was vibrant. He looked more alive than he had in months, and it wasn't because of her or their baby. It was because of her, Serafina. So you were with her all night? Rowan finally met her gaze, and the man she loved was gone. In his place was a CEO, a stranger. Yes, he said. No shame, just fact. We were drafting the new charter. We're announcing the merger tomorrow. And the baby, Rowan? She asked, her voice a thread. Where does our baby fit into this new charter? He sighed, a sound of profound exasperation. He ran a hand through his damp hair. Celia, look, I've been thinking. This life, this cozy little world we built, it was nice for a while, but I'm meant for more. We are meant for more. What are you talking about? This, he gestured around the apartment. This vintage, quiet life. It's not me anymore. Serafina, she understands the pressure. She thrives on it. She's on my level. On my level, the words hit Celia harder than bake sale. And I'm not, Celia said. It wasn't a question. You want a simple life, Celia. You want babies and old books and feelings. I'm building an empire. I can't have distractions." "A distraction?" Her voice rose for the first time. "My God, Rowan, I am your wife. This is your child." "And I will take care of you," he said, raising his voice to match hers. "You'll have a generous settlement. You'll never have to work in that dusty little shop again. You and the baby will be set for life. You can buy all the vintage dresses you want." The room tilted. He was firing her. From her own life. "A settlement," she said, her voice numb. You're talking about a divorce." "I'm talking about an upgrade," he said, his voice softening, as if he were explaining a complex deal to a simple-minded investor. "For both of us. I'm setting you free, Celia. You're not built for this. The stress, the expectations. You'll be happier. And I need to be with someone who understands what it takes." He thought she was weak. He thought her kindness, her quiet, her lack of cutthroat ambition was a flaw. He had looked at her strength, the strength to walk away from billions, the strength to build a life on her own terms, and he had seen simplicity. This was the great, tragic irony. She had hidden her power to see if he would love her. But he didn't love her. He loved the idea of her, the anchor. And now that he wanted to fly, the anchor was just a dead weight. "Who is she?" Celia asked, though she already knew. "This Serafina. It wasn't just drafting a charter, was it? You slept with her." Rowan's jaw tensed. He gave the smallest, most infinitesimal nod, a confession. Celia had one more card. The only one she'd ever had. The one she'd been so desperate to play to save him just 24 hours ago. "Rowan," she said, her voice shaking, a new, cold anger replacing the shock. "You are making a terrible mistake. You have no idea. You have no idea who I am." "Oh, I think I do," he said, his voice filled with a sudden, patronizing pity. "You're Celia. You're sweet, and that's okay. But I'm a shark, and I can't be married to a minnow. And her, Serafina, is she a shark too?" "She's a titan," he said, a note of awe in his voice. "And she sees me as one too." He went into the bedroom. She heard him opening drawers, the zip of a suitcase. He was leaving. Right now. Celia stood frozen in the living room. The lie. Her beautiful, perfect lie. It had been her shield to protect herself from the world of men who wanted her for her money. But it had backfired. It had hidden her from the one man she wanted, so completely that he couldn't see her at all. He didn't know her. He walked out, a single sleek leather bag in his hand. He paused at the door. "My lawyers will be in touch tomorrow, Celia. Be smart. Just sign the papers. It's a good deal." He didn't say, "I love you." He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He looked at her one last time, his eyes as empty and reflective as the glass in his high-rise windows. Then he was gone. Celia stayed in that apartment for one more hour. She didn't cry. She didn't pack. The cold, clear resolve from the day before returned, but it was no longer about saving him. It was about saving herself. She picked up her phone. She didn't call her father. She didn't call her friends. She scrolled to a number she hadn't dialed in 3 years, a number saved under a single, simple name. Marcus. Marcus Thorne. Lead counsel for Knight Capital, her father's fixer, her godfather, the man who had taught her how to play chess when she was 6. He answered on the first ring. Celia Bean. His voice was warm, rumbling, and utterly devoid of surprise. "I was wondering when you'd call. Your father's been restless." "Hello, Marcus," Celia said, and she was shocked to hear her own voice. It wasn't her voice, it was someone else's. It was the voice of a knight. "He's left me, Marcus." "I see," was all he said. The warmth was gone, replaced by a terrifying, Arctic cold professionalism. "The tech boy, Rowan Fairborn. He's divorcing me. He's with someone else. He's merging his company with Apex." "Is he now?" Marcus said. It was a statement, not a question. "How ambitious. And you? What do you want, Celia?" Celia looked at the shattered photo frame on the floor, at the image of the man she had loved, the man who was gone. "I want you to come to Chicago," she said, her voice hard, "and I want you to handle the divorce." A beat of silence. "And Celia," she added, a single hot tear finally escaping, tracing a path of fire down her cold cheek. "I want you to ruin him." Rowan Fairborn was on top of the world. The next 3 days were a blur of adrenaline, champagne, and Serafina. The merger announcement was a bombshell. Wall Street loved it. Apex Ethereal became the new darling of the tech world. Their combined stock, he'd been given a generous new holding, soared. He and Serafina were a power couple. They were in Forbes, the Wall Street Journal. They were the new titans. He'd moved into her penthouse apartment, a sterile, modern space that looked more like a gallery than a home. It was all white marble, black leather, and sharp, dangerous-looking sculptures. There wasn't a vintage teacup in sight. It was, he told himself, intoxicating. Serafina was everything Celia was not. She was ruthless in her negotiations, brilliant in her strategy, and insatiable in her ambition. She saw his darkest, most grasping, most insecure driven qualities, and she applauded them. She called his ruthlessness vision. She called his betrayal of Celia a necessary executive decision. "You can't build an empire if you're worried about hurting people's feelings, Rowan," she'd said, sipping a martini, as naked as he was in her vast, black-sheeted bed. "Empires are built on the bones of nice. You're finally shedding your skin." He was. He felt new, powerful, unencumbered. The thought of Celia, her small shop, her feelings, it all felt like a lifetime ago, a drab, black and white movie. He was in Technicolor now. The baby, well, he'd compartmentalized that. He was a provider. He'd sent the divorce papers via a curt, professional messenger. The settlement was, in his mind, incredibly generous. A lump sum of $5 million, plus the apartment, which he was now happy to be rid of. It was more money than a shop girl from nowhere would ever see in 10 lifetimes. She'd be a fool not to sign. She'd be set. He'd done his duty. His lawyer, a slick, aggressive man named Tanner, had called him. "She hasn't responded, Rowan. The papers are just sitting. We've set a preliminary meeting for tomorrow. She'll show up. They always do when the money's on the table." "Good," Rowan said. "Just get it done." He wanted it clean. He wanted it fast. He wanted the last, annoying thread of his old life snipped, so he could focus on his new one. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. at his lawyer's office, a glass and mahogany temple to corporate law. Rowan strode in at 10:02, Serafina on his arm. She'd insisted on coming. "Moral support, darling," she'd purred, "and to show a united front." She was wearing a blood-red sheath dress and a smile that was all teeth. Tanner met them, beaming. "Mr. Fairborn, Ms. Darcy, a pleasure." "Is she here?" Rowan asked, curt. "In the conference room, just waiting." Tanner's smile was smug. "She came alone. No lawyer. This will be quick." Rowan felt a brief, annoying pang of something. Pity? Guilt? She'd come alone? How pathetic. How... Celia. He brushed it off. This was for the best. They walked into the conference room, and the world stopped. Celia was there. She was not crying. She was not wearing a floral dress. She was dressed in a navy blue, ruthlessly tailored Tom Ford pantsuit that probably cost more than Rowan's first car. Her hair, usually a soft, artistic tumble, was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. Her face was pale, but her eyes were on fire. She looked, he realized with a jolt, like a queen. She was not alone. Seated on her right was a man in his late 60s, with a shock of white hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from a mountain. He was sipping a coffee from a simple paper cup, but he wore a bespoke, three-piece Savile Row suit. He radiated an aura of such profound, quiet, dangerous power that Rowan's instincts, the ones that had helped him survive his childhood, screamed. "You're late, Rowan," Celia said. Her voice was not the voice he knew. It was 2 degrees colder. It was the voice of a stranger. "Celia, who is this?" Rowan said, stalling. Tanner, his lawyer, suddenly looked green. He was staring at the man next to Celia, his smugness evaporating like mist. Mr. Fairborn," Tanner stammered, his eyes wide. I think that's Marcus Thorne." "I know my name, son," the man said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He put down his cup and stood. He wasn't a tall man, but he seemed to suck all the air from the room. "Rowan Fairborn," Thorne said, not offering a hand. "I am Marcus Thorne. I am lead counsel for the Knight estates. I am here representing Ms. Celia Knight." Rowan's brain couldn't process the words. "Knight estates, I don't—" Serafina, beside him, was the first to get it. She was smart. She knew the language. Her perfectly manicured hand, which had been resting on Rowan's arm, went cold. She took a tiny, almost imperceptible step away from him. "Knight?" she whispered, her voice no longer a purr. "As in Alistair Knight? As in Knight Capital?" Marcus Thorne smiled. It was not a nice smile. "The very same?" Rowan looked at Celia, the farmer's market, the tomato stain, the dusty shop, the simple life. "I don't understand," Rowan said, his voice cracking. "Celia, what is he talking about?" Celia stood up. She walked to the head of the table. She was, he realized, visibly pregnant, a small defiant curve beneath the expensive suit. He'd been so blinded by the suit and the man. He hadn't even— "I told you, Rowan," she said, her cold, new voice filling the room. "You didn't know who I was. You wanted a bigger world. You wanted to play on a different level." "Well," she gestured to Marcus Thorne. "Welcome to it." Tanner, Rowan's lawyer, suddenly fainted. He didn't just stumble. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed in a heap, his slick, expensive shoes clattering on the floor. "Oh dear," Marcus said, looking at the heap. "It seems your counsel is indisposed." Rowan was still staring at Celia. All the pieces were slamming into place. A concussion of revelations. Her lack of family photos. Her, "I don't like to talk about my father." Her casual, unstudied lack of concern about money. Her offer. "I have resources. I can make one call." He hadn't been married to a shop girl. He had been married to a princess, an empress, and he'd just fired her. He'd called her a minnow. "Celia," he croaked, his entire new money bravado shattering, revealing the terrified, poor kid from the steel mill underneath. "Celia, I— Serafina was already backing out of the room. I have a call," she whispered, her face white as a sheet. A board meeting." She was gone. The Titan had fled. "The settlement you offered," Celia said, picking up the papers from the table, not even looking at them. $5 million. It's generous." She looked at Marcus. "Marcus, what's our current operating overhead? Per hour?" Marcus checked his watch. A simple, elegant Patek Philippe. "Globally, we're sitting at roughly 8.2 million, give or take." Celia nodded. So, Rowan, your generous settlement? She let the words hang. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she began to tear the divorce papers in half. I'm afraid, she said, dropping the pieces on the table, that we will be filing our own petition. You wanted a merger. You wanted to build an empire. Well, you've just initiated a hostile takeover, Rowan, and your apex ethereal. She paused, locking eyes with him. The man she had loved. The man she had adored. Is the target. Rowan's life didn't just unravel. It was disintegrated. The fallout wasn't a slow burn. It was a nuclear detonation. The word night acted as a solvent, dissolving Rowan's new world in a matter of hours. Marcus Thorne didn't need to file a single lawsuit. He just made phone calls. The first call was to the bank that held the loan for the Apex Ethereal merger. The bank's largest single investor was Knight Capital. The loan was frozen, pending a full review of Ethereal's questionable leadership and ethical vulnerabilities. The second call was to the board of directors at Apex. Serafina, who had returned to her office, was summarily called into an emergency meeting. It turned out that Apex's second-largest shareholder, a quiet, unassuming hedge fund, was a wholly owned subsidiary of the Knight Estates. Serafina was fired. By noon, she was being escorted out of the building, her Titan status revoked, her career in ashes. The third call was to the Wall Street Journal. The new Titans article was unceremoniously pulled from the website, replaced by a scathing piece on Rowan's predatory leveraging and the instability of the ethereal platform. The stock, which had soared, didn't just tank. It plummeted. It fell so fast and so hard, it triggered an automatic halt in trading. By 5 p.m., Rowan Fairborn was no longer a millionaire. He was, in fact, millions of dollars in debt. The new stock he'd acquired was worthless. The loans he'd taken out against his original company were called in. His assets were frozen. He was sitting in Serafina's, the bank's penthouse, watching the financial news. His name was on every ticker. But he wasn't a titan. He was a cautionary tale. His phone rang. It wasn't a banker. It wasn't a lawyer. It was the doorman. Mr. Fairborn? Your car is being towed. He looked out the window. His gleaming black Maserati, his symbol of making it, was being hoisted onto a flatbed. He was ruined. It had taken less than 8 hours. He thought of Celia. He thought of her face in that office, the coldness, the power. That was the woman he'd called simple. He spent the night in the apartment, but the power was cut off by morning. The bank had foreclosed. He was, quite literally, left in the dark. He left with nothing. The suit on his back. His useless, silent phone. He walked out of the marble lobby, the doorman studiously avoiding his gaze. He was no one. He walked for hours, his expensive shoes, the ones he'd been so proud of, rubbing his heels raw. He walked through the city, past the gleaming towers of commerce, until he found himself in a neighborhood he hadn't seen in years. The cobblestone streets, the small bell-chiming shops. He found himself standing outside Second Story. It was dark. A for lease sign was in the window. The bell was gone. She'd cleared it out. It was just an empty, dusty room. The last piece of Celia, the woman he knew or thought he knew, was gone. This, he realized, was his exile. This was true nothing. It was so much worse than the poverty he'd grown up in. That was a nothing with the potential for something. This was a something that had been turned permanently and surgically into nothing. He sat on the curb, across from the empty shop. The man who had been on the cover of Forbes 3 days ago sat with his head in his hands, a cautionary tale to the indifferent pigeons. Where was she? Celia wasn't in a penthouse. She wasn't celebrating. She was in a small, secure, and beautiful cottage on the shores of Lake Michigan, an hour outside the city. It was a property that had been in her mother's family for a century. It was her real home, the one place she'd always felt safe. Marcus had driven her there himself after the meeting. "He's broken, Marcus," she'd said, watching the city skyline fade in the rearview mirror. "He's exposed, Celia Bean," Marcus corrected, his voice gentle. "There is a difference. A broken man can be pitied. An exposed man is just learning a lesson." You were so ruthless," she'd whispered. "You destroyed him." "No, child," Marcus said, his eyes on the road. "I did not. I simply turned on the lights. He was the one who built a house of cards in a hurricane. I just supplied the wind." Now, she was alone. The cottage was quiet, filled with the soft, worn furniture of her childhood. She was sitting in a window seat, overlooking the vast, gray, churning water of the lake. She was wrapped in an old, knitted afghan. She was, for the first time, truly, fully Celia Knight. And she was miserable. There was no victory. There was no triumph. She had unmade the man she loved. She had used the very power she'd run away from, the power she'd always hated, to crush him. She'd done it to protect herself, to protect her child. But it felt exactly like something her father would do. This was her internal struggle. She'd won the war, but she felt like she'd lost her soul. She had become the knight to save the Celia, and now she didn't know which one was real. A hand went to her stomach. The baby kicked, a small, fluttering, reassuring tap from within. "I know," she whispered to the baby. "I know, it's complicated." She was free of Rowan, but she was now, more than ever, shackled to her father's world, her father's methods. The man she'd loved was gone. The woman she'd been was gone too. She was pregnant, fabulously wealthy, and utterly, devastatingly alone. This was her victory, and it felt exactly like a defeat. A week passed. A week of silence. Rowan was living in a $40 a night motel off the highway, a place that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. He'd sold his Patek Philippe watch, the Titan watch, to a pawn shop for cash. It was enough to live on for a few weeks. He spent his days in the public library, using the free internet. He searched his own name. The articles were brutal. He searched Celia Knight. The shop girl was a ghost. In her place was the Ice Princess, the reclusive heiress. He read about her education, Vassar, Oxford, her gap years spent building schools in Africa, her quiet, billion-dollar philanthropic work. The woman he'd called Simple had negotiated peace treaties between warring factions. The woman he'd accused of wanting to hold a bake sale had a personal net worth that dwarfed the GDP of small nations. He'd been a fool, not just a fool, a blind, arrogant, spectacular fool. He didn't love her. He knew that now. The man he was incapable of loving a woman like that Celia. He'd only been capable of loving the costume she wore, and she, in turn, had only been capable of loving his. The self-made man. The lie had been mutual, but the baby was real. His child. A child who was now, by default, a knight. He had to see her. It wasn't hard to find her. He might be broken, but he was still a brilliant tech analyst. He'd taught himself to find patterns. He found a single anomalous property tax payment in a quiet county, a property linked to a holding company, which was linked to Knight Capital. He'd found the cottage. He used the last of his cash to buy a bus ticket, then walked the last 5 miles. He found her, not in the cottage, but walking on the cold, wind-swept beach. She was different. She was wrapped in a simple gray coat, but she walked with a new, unshakable seeming confidence. She was no longer an anchor. She was the whole coastline. She saw him coming. She didn't look surprised. She just waited. He stopped 10 feet away. He looked terrible. He knew he did. He hadn't shaved. He was thin. The expensive suit was rumpled, stained. He was the ghost of the man he'd been. "Celia," he said. His voice was raw. "Rowan," she replied. Her voice was just quiet, not cold, not warm, just a fact. What was he here to say? I'm sorry? I love you? I hate you? Was any of it real? He finally whispered, the wind tearing the words from his mouth. She looked out at the churning gray water. I think the love was real, she said, her voice thoughtful. The love was real. But the people, we were sketches. We weren't finished. I was hiding. And you were performing. He nodded. That was painfully, devastatingly accurate. I loved you, Rowan, she said, turning to him, and he saw for the first time a flash of the old Celia. Her eyes were wet. I loved the man I met at the farmer's market. I loved the man who built something from nothing. I was so proud of you. And then I became, what? One of them? One of your father's world? No, she said, and her voice was sad. You became you. The you that was always there under the surface. The you that was so terrified of being poor again that you'd burn down anything, anyone, to get away from it, including me. I'm ruined, he said. It was a pathetic, simple statement. No, she said. You're at zero. You're back at the nothing you started with. You've done it once. You can do it again. Was that hope? Was she offering help? Celia, he said, taking a step. The baby. I can be a father. I'll get a job. I'll start over. For the baby. Celia looked at him. The man who had called their child a distraction and the worst possible timing. And she almost smiled. It was a smile of such profound, tragic sadness. A job, Rowan. What job? Your name it's poison. No one will hire you. Not in this world. So what? I'm just done? This is it? You win? You take everything and I just disappear? I didn't take anything, Rowan, she said, and now the coldness was back. You gave it away. You traded your company, your wife, and your child for Serafina, for a level. You made your choice. I made mine. He was about to argue, to beg, to something. And then he heard a new sound, the crunch of gravel. A long, black, impossibly silent Rolls-Royce had pulled up to the cottage. A man got out. Not Marcus. This man was older, in his 70s, but he stood as straight as a steel rod. He was wearing a simple, dark cashmere coat. He had Celia's eyes. Rowan had never seen him before, but he knew, with chilling certainty, exactly who he was. Alistair Knight. The man himself. The shadow that had haunted their entire marriage. He walked past Rowan as if he were a piece of driftwood. He didn't even glance at him. He walked straight to Celia. Celia, he said. His voice was like a granite tomb opening. Father, she said. Alistair looked at her, his eyes softening for a fraction of a second. His gaze dropped to her stomach. So, he said. It's true. He then finally turned to look at Rowan. He assessed him. His gaze traveled from Rowan's dirty shoes to his rumpled suit to his unshaven, desperate face. It was the most complete and dismissive judgment Rowan had ever felt. So, Alistair Knight said, his voice dripping with a disappointment so vast it was almost impressive. This is what you traded my empire for. Startup. Quaint. He looked at Rowan again. You, he said, are the father of my grandchild. It was a statement of profound cosmic disgust. Father, don't, Celia said, her voice small. Quiet, Celia, Alistair said, not unkindly. You played your hand. You ran away. You had your experiment. It's over. You're a knight. Start acting like one. He turned back to Rowan. A knight's child, he said, does not have a destitute father. It's unseemly. I don't want your money, Rowan spat, his last pathetic ember of pride flaring up. Alistair Knight laughed. It was a dry, shocking sound. My money? Boy, you have no idea. This isn't about money. This is about optics. He pulled a business card from his coat. You will be at this address tomorrow, 8 a.m. You will be given a job. Rowan stared at the card. Knight Capital, Acquisitions. A job? Yes, Alistair said. We have an opening, in the mailroom. You will sort things. You are good at assessing value, or misassessing it. The humiliation was a physical, burning thing. The mailroom. He was being offered a job in the mailroom. It is charity, Mr. Fairborn, Alistair said. A settlement, if you will. You will accept it. You will work. You will provide. And you will be silent. My grandchild will not have Rowan Fairborn cautionary tale for a father. He will have Rowan Fairborn, who works for me. Is that clear? This was the checkmate. The knight's gambit. It wasn't ruin. It was service. It was a cage. He would be a prisoner forever. He would be the poor kid in the shadow of the steel mill for the rest of his life. The mill would just be Knight Capital. He looked at Celia. Help me. Say something. Celia just watched him. Her face was an unreadable, heartbreaking mask. She'd made her choice. She'd chosen her father. She'd chosen the knight. This was his choice. Walk away, disappear, be nothing, but be free. Or take the job, be something, be a father, and be a slave. He looked at Celia, at her pregnant belly, his child. He looked at Alistair, the man who had won, and Rowan Fairborn, the titan, the shark, the self-made man, did the last and only thing he could do. He took the card, a single broken nod. I'll be there, he whispered. Celia closed her eyes, a single hot tear, a tear of, what, victory? Sorrow? Regret? Slid down her face. She had her child. She had her father. She had her safety. And she had just lost everything. Rowan turned, the small white card clutched in his hand. He didn't look back. He just walked away, back down the beach, a ghost in a borrowed suit, walking into his own personal, unending exile. Rowan got his bigger world. But he was a prisoner in it. Celia was safe. But was she happy? She'd won, but she'd lost the man she'd once loved, and she'd had to become the very thing she'd tried to escape. She was free. But she was alone. The question is, what would you have done? If you were Celia, would you have taken him back? Would you have ever forgiven him? Or was the knight gambit the only move left? And if you were Rowan, would you have taken the job?